Welcome to the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. My name is Jeremiah Regan.
And I'm Juan, and we are back with Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. On to lecture number 4 today, Christmas Present, an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man.
Now, Juan, our listeners can't see you the way I can, so they don't know that you're smiling and smirking as we're getting ready to introduce this episode. And I have to guess that's because you pointed out how Scrooge has a very low view of people getting ready to celebrate Christmas. They're broke, but they're spending money. They don't really have any reason to be happy, but they still are. And he gets a correction in this lecture.
Yeah, he's about to be proven wrong by the ghost of Christmas Present when he goes and visits the Cratchit family who are preparing for Christmas.
He sees that these are decent people who are trying to do their best to enjoy the important things in life, family, worshiping their creator and their savior, and they're doing it with joy even though they have very little material wealth and very few of the goods and necessities of life.
And there's some great, that's right, there's some great instances in that passage specifically of the Cratchits that are funny, but it helps you to enjoy and laugh and look at the little things in life that make things beautiful. It's not just the big things, it's not just the big events, it's the little things that also matter.
Perhaps the most poignant encounter that shows Scrooge how wrong he really was is when he sees Tiny Tim playing with his siblings, playing with his family, and thinks back to a statement he had made about Tiny Tim and his medical ailments. If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. This is a hideously cruel sentiment, thinking of a human being as just a mere consumer of goods, someone who detracts from the bounty of other people. And he's corrected when he hears Bob offer a toast for the Christmas feast, meager as it is, to Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. And he starts to have his eyes and his heart opened to decency and love and joy, and stop thinking of people as entries on an accountant's sheet, as mere detractors from the bounty of others.
That's right. I like that Dickens chose to do that. He showed that Malthusian nonsense of surplus populations,
right,
as the one of the turning points of Scrooge. That's when he sees Tiny Tim and realizes he's not surplus. He's a human being.
And it's beautiful to see that, unlike Scrooge, who does not see the good in others under normal circumstances, he goes to the Cratchits, he goes to his nephew's party, and he hears people praising him, who probably doesn't deserve it. Those people are finding the good in him when he rarely does that, if ever, to other people.
One of the things we have at Hillsdale that you may be unfamiliar with is a monthly speech digest called Imprimis. It's a free speech digest. It's taken from the best speakers that come to Hillsdale or a Hillsdale event around the country. And it's on topics of politics, economics, education, the arts. It's completely free. We deliver it to about 6.5 million people across the country. You can claim yours by going to hillsdale.edu/read. That's hillsdale.edu/read.
Now let's turn back to Professor Dwight Lindley for Lecture 4 of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Christmas Present, an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man.
Welcome back. We are now ready to start Stave 3 and the second of the 3 spirits. This is going to be the Ghost of Christmas Present. We've already done the Ghost of Christmas Past, which was the previous stave, Stave 2, and we did Marley's Ghost in Stave number 1. And so we're moving through our hauntings and now ready for the latest. So at the beginning of Stave 3, Scrooge has been sleeping and he wakes up again, just as he did at the beginning of Stave 2. But it's different now. Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatching to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. but finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all round the bed. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. All right, so it makes complete sense. He's on edge. He got the creepy pulling back of the curtains last time. Now I'm going to open these curtains myself. I'm going to wait. I'm going to see when this thing enters the room. I'm going to be ready. There's a desire there, understandable, to control the terms of the experience. This will not be given to him, though. He is not going to get the same spirit. He's not going to get to establish the terms of the interaction. And so he's just going to be left there waiting for a little bit. This is funny if you step back and reflect on it. Christmas past, the first ghost, or at least the first of the 3 time ghosts, that spirit immediately on the hour pulls back the curtain. So Christmas passes on time. Now Christmas present, where is he? He's late. The present is late, the past is on time. I don't know what that means, but it means something probably. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing, and consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at that very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always the person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too. At last, I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room. Okay, and of course he goes into the next room, and there's the ghost of Christmas present. He's apparently been there some time. So this is a mysterious entry of the ghost of Christmas present, or rather, he bids Scrooge enter into his space. What does that even mean? He just emits this light from the next room, which Scrooge has to respond to. The light, which he at first doesn't understand, he gradually realizes is emanating from the one that he's supposed to pursue. The light is calling to him in a way, and he didn't realize that's what was happening at first. This whole book, this whole carol, is a series of calls that Scrooge receives and has to learn how to respond to. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. He's called by his own name, and this is remarkable because this ghost, this second ghost, is requiring something of him and is calling him out to meet him. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, because Marley lived there before him, or for many and many a winter season gone. And then we start to hear about this fecundity of riches, foodstuffs, things to eat that cover the floor and are all underneath the throne of this second ghost. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense twelfth cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. Somehow this Ghost of Christmas present is just overflowing with goodness. This is somehow important for the present. Come in, he says, and know me better, man. So this ghost calls Scrooge out of himself to know him better. There's just this kind of open geniality here. I am the ghost of Christmas present, he tells him. Remarkably, his whole description is here. His dress is all interesting and important. The thing that sticks out to me is he's girded round the middle with an antique scabbard with no sword in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. There's a place where a sword could be, but it's absent, right? So there's no violence in this figure, even kind of potentially. There's just gift, right? There's just fullness of good things. That's what he brings. Something about Christmas present that is connected to that. You have never seen the like of me before, exclaimed the spirit. Never, Scrooge made answer to it. Have you never walked with the younger members of my family? Meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years. And it turns out he has 1,800 of these brothers, right? Going back to the time of Christ, of course. A tremendous family to provide for, muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas present rose. Spirit, said Scrooge submissively, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. So this is a different Scrooge. He's still kind of nervous and on edge. He's still a little bit controlling and testy and on guard, but he's opening up. He wants to follow of his own volition now, and not by compulsion. If you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe, says this spirit. So this is another of many little Christ allusions in these pages. Touch my robe. You think of, in the Gospels, there's a woman who has a bleeding problem who touches the end of Christ's robe and is healed. Again, the passage out with this ghost is connected to healing. So they go out and everything in that room disappears. They're out in the streets now, and they see a set of Christmas scenes. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great, round, pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squab and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. So we have all of this food, and he goes on. The next paragraph goes even further with this. The interesting thing about all of these fruits and nuts and full descriptions of containers of food is how many of them are personified. These fruits are all coming to life and giving themselves like people. The onions are Spanish friars, and then the Norfolk biffins, which is a kind of English apple, are urgently entreating and beseeching people to carry them home and eat them after dinner. The remarkable thing in all of these cases, and in many other things that we see in this early part of Christmas present, is that everything in the world is reaching out to give itself, to bestow itself and call you in and draw you into an engagement. That's the way the world is, it seems to be suggesting, right? Especially on Christmas Day. So Scrooge's response is important. We get a lot of people out in the lanes, and there are people refusing to argue with one another, for they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day. And so it was. God love it. So it was. These are exclamations of the narrator, but they reflect the affirmation of Scrooge himself, who is being drawn into this spirit inexorably. So here we have a general affirmation of this whole scene. Scrooge is being drawn into the scene along with everyone else. Now I want to skip forward and talk about the Cratchit's house, which is the next place we go. So we get there, and they live in a little 4-roomed house, tiny place, considering they have several children. Bob Cratchit's house is a kind of microcosm of that fullness we saw in the markets outside. We get this description of the food that they're preparing and all of the people inside of it. Peter Cratchit with his fork in a saucepan of potatoes. We've got 2 smaller Cratchits chasing each other around. People basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion. And they're exalting Master Peter Cratchit, this is one of the brothers, to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes bubbling up knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. So you've got even the potatoes, which they're preparing in the pot, bubbling, right, and knocking up against the lid. Please let us out, and so that you can peel and eat us. Please eat me, right? This is the kind of fullness we have. Everybody knows the story of Oliver Twist, who says at the beginning of that Dickens novel, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" These potatoes are saying, "Please, sir, eat us." This is a kind of little, again, strange and attractive image of what this whole book is about, that reality itself is a gift that is giving itself to us at all times, even and especially to the poor here, right? Partially because they appreciate the gift better because they have less. And it's there for those who have eyes to see. These are things that Scrooge has been closed to, but is having to learn how to hear now. Now, Martha comes in, and they're waiting for Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim. He comes in with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, and Tiny Tim's crutch and his limbs supported by an iron frame. The one thing that I wanted to point out about the Cratchits before we go any further is that they're all here and present to one another. They're interested in Martha. When she comes home, they receive her. Then she's going to hide and play a game on her father when he comes in. And then he comes in saying, "Where's Martha?" And then they're looking for each other. They're finding each other. Everything is a complex interaction. This is just normal family stuff. But it's not normal for Scrooge. There's this reciprocity of presence where they're giving themselves to each other and receiving and making their gift in response. And again, very normal stuff. This is what love does. But these are things that Scrooge has to be schooled in, that he has to be drawn out into so that he can learn how to do it again.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now. Or text the word Imprimis to 71844 and we'll send you a link to sign up for your free lifetime subscription. That's IMPRIMIS to 71844.
Let's skip forward after dinner. They're pulling out some kind of hot punch drink, and they're drinking it all together out of 3 little cups that they have. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. Famous line, right? And this is famous for a reason, because this really is at the heart of the novel in some ways. It's being grateful for the gift of little things that you don't deserve, and returning thanks, returning your own little gift, which also isn't worth anything, but is what you're called to give, right? That's what Tiny Tim is doing. That's what Bob is doing. That's what this whole little family is doing. Scrooge is immediately interested. Will Tiny Tim live? Tell me, spirit. The ghost admits, he might die. "No, no," said Scrooge. "Oh no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here." In other words, if things keep on going on their current trajectory, he won't make it. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Okay, so Scrooge has to eat his own words back from stave 1 that he threw out to one of the benevolent gentlemen.
And decrease the surplus population.
And of course, he's moved on and is ready to, he thinks differently now, but he's going to be forced to reflect on the meaning of his words. Now let's listen to the way this resolves. Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is, and where it is. Will you decide what man shall live, what man shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. O God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Obviously, Tiny Tim here is directly the surplus, the too much, right? I guess he has to die so that the rest of us have enough, is the principle applied by Scrooge from stave 1. But now you've got it attached. It's not just a generality. It's not just an abstraction. It's connected to a real person. But what I would suggest is that this entire stave so far has been showing the way everything is surplus. The Spanish onions in the market and the apples and all of the food collected by the Cratchits, all of the Cratchits themselves, none of these people are necessary. They're all extra in the sense that they're all beyond what is deserved, what makes sense, and they're all given over and above what is needed. In fact, reality itself, I think this novella suggests, is surplus. Reality itself is a gift and is a gratuity beyond what anyone deserves or could plan or ask for. That's what Scrooge needs to learn. From here, we leave the Cratchits, and Scrooge sails on to visit a few other people before getting to Fred's house. First of all, we go down with miners, where miners live. And then we move forward to a lighthouse, and to other places. The interesting thing about all these places, we're going to dark and sort of dismal places. A lonely house beside a mine, a lighthouse where there are only two men present, that's surrounded by the elements, and it's a rough place. There's Christmas cheer in each of them. They each have a kind of light in the darkness. In the case of the lighthouse, there's literally a light in the darkness quality to them. That's the spirit of Christmas, is this kind of bittersweet, twinkling, mysterious joy that comes out of a hard time. Then we go out to the sea and we see some guys celebrating Christmas on a ship in the middle of, a stormy ocean in the night. It was a great surprise to Scrooge while listening to the moaning of the wind and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss whose depths were secrets as profound as death. It was a great surprise to Scrooge while thus engaged to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at that same nephew with approving affability. All of a sudden, we're not on the sea, we're in Fred's parlor, or in his living room. And we've changed scenes without even realizing it. But what I want to suggest, all of these scenes that we pass through are scenes of joy in the midst of darkness. There's something fundamental about this for Christmas, as I suggested. Life itself is this passage over an abyss, over who knows what. It's a passage through mystery. And yet, the joy of Christmas is finding a reason to laugh, finding a reason to be grateful, finding something to affirm in the midst of that mysterious darkness. That's kind of one of the kind of core images that we can take away from this book. So now we're in Fred's parlor and things are different. "Ha ha," laughed Scrooge's nephew. "Ha ha ha. If you should happen, by any unlikely chance, to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is, I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me and I'll cultivate his acquaintance. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that while there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor." When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily. Okay, we've already sort of seen this in Fred, back in Stave 1, that there's a kind of spontaneous joy in him. Here, I think the thing that's important to see is his laugh. He's a poor man, okay? They don't have much to gather together but themselves, but his laugh is his gift to the people around him, and it becomes something that they can all share and that can multiply. This is a sort of image of that gratuity that rises above like all of the reasons for it, just like good cheer and joy and laughter does. After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about when they sung a glee or catch, I can assure you. Especially Topper, this is one of Fred's friends, who could growl away in the bass like a good one and never swell the large veins in his forehead or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp and played, among other tunes, a simple air, a mere nothing. You might learn to whistle it in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. That was his sister, okay? This is a song that Scrooge's young sister used to sing. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that ghost had shown him came upon his mind. So Scrooge, hearing this piece of music, which his little sister used to sing, is brought back into the past in a fresh moment. He softened more and more and thought that if he could have listened to it often years ago, he might have cultivated the kindnesses of life for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. So the interesting thing here is how music is attached to the past and elicits love. It draws out these connections under the surface of things, just like music still does for us. We hear songs attached to our own past, to this epoch or that of my life, and it carries me back fully to those times. This is another thing that's very deeply, mysteriously attached to imagination and to love, to the heart. So, of course, it's appropriate for a Christmas party. It's part of what is drawing Scrooge in here. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played at forfeits. For it is good, this is a children's game, right? And it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. And then they play Blind Man's Bluff. The interesting thing here we have to pause and recognize, there's something mysteriously connected in all of this to the mystery of the incarnation, which is at the heart of Christmas and the Christmas season itself. Something about God himself becoming a child is meaningful, significant for this whole train of experiences Scrooge himself is having. Here, he himself is becoming like a child. He's being drawn into these games. So he's being drawn into this Christ-like position himself. Of course, all the people that he's participating in too, his nephew and they're all acting like children as well. There's something appropriate about this. All of these games that they share with one another, some of which end up being at the expense of Scrooge, jokes about Scrooge behind his back. And he doesn't care. He accepts it all. "He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure," said Fred, "and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here is a glass of mulled wine ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge." "Well, Uncle Scrooge," they cried, "a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is," said Scrooge's nephew. "He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless, Uncle Scrooge." Again, a secret at the heart of this book. He's getting what he doesn't deserve. And Fred's willing to give it. Love is willing to give people better than they deserve. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in an audible speech if the ghost had given him time, but he's whisked away now for the next experience. That's important, though, because what we see there is an unself-conscious act of reciprocity there. He wants to give them back what they're giving him. They pledge his health. He wants to pledge their health. He wants to make his counter gift. That's what love does. That's what he's being drawn into. And he's doing it instinctually now. But the ghost leads him on through a few other scenes. Much they saw, Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful, on foreign lands, and they were close at home, by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope, by poverty, and it was rich, in almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man, in his little brief authority, had not made fast the door, and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precepts. This is almost a school of charity or mercy for Scrooge. If you've ever read Matthew chapter 25, this is the parable of the sheep and the goats, there's this set of images of going out and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and caring for the sick and all of these kinds of works of mercy, which Scrooge is being led through because he needs to enter the school of love. This is what Christmas is about. It was a long night, if it were only a night. But Scrooge had his doubts of this because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it, until they left a children's 12th night party, when, looking at the spirit, they stood together in an open space. He noticed that its hair was gray. So there are traditionally 12 days of Christmas which you celebrate. They've all been collapsed into one night for Scrooge. Whatever that means, there's something mysterious happening here with time. All time is kind of caught up together into this one night for Scrooge. What does that mean exactly? Very mysterious right now and unexplained. I think it will make a little more sense as we go forward in the novella. But for now, we can just register that he's being drawn into this mysterious play of time and condensation of time. He's both outside of time and inside of it, experiencing it all compressed together. This is somehow something he needed to see. So we'll come back to that theme. The last thing, of course, he sees in stave number 3 with the Ghost of Christmas Present are these two semi-allegorical figures of ignorance and want. These are poor, impoverished, sickly children who are reminiscent of poor kids that Dickens would have seen walking around London. Also, the children we associate with that report on the condition of children that I mentioned in the first lecture. And here they're brought out as one kind of final spectacle for Scrooge to see. Scrooge says, "Have they no refuge? Are there no prisons?" said the spirit. "Are there no workhouses?" And the bell strikes 12. Scrooge looked about for the ghost and saw it not. Ghost of Christmas Present disappeared. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. This peculiar thing about these three ghosts, the Ghost of Christmas Past is on time, as I said. The Ghost of Christmas Present is late, or at least so it would appear. The Ghost of Christmas Future is early, right? He appears even before his time has come, before stave 4. What does that mean? It's a kind of uncanny, seemingly meaningful difference between each of these ghosts. So we'll find out next time in stave 4 in our lecture about that, why this last one is coming so early. I'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hillsdale Online Courses podcast. If you want to continue learning about A Christmas Carol or other topics, please visit hillsdale.edu/course. There you will find over 40 free online courses, including the history of classical music, Paradise Lost, Theology 101, and many more. The courses include additional readings, study guides, fully produced videos, and you can chat with your fellow students on a dedicated forum. Upon completing a course, you will also get a certificate. All our courses are free because we believe that a virtuous citizen is the best defense for liberty. So pursue the education necessary for freedom and happiness at hillsdale.edu/course today. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Thanks for listening.